It is Donald Trump's own advisors who have caused the biggest, most damaging, and most incriminating leaks related to the Epstein files. And it's happened yet again, this time involving a former White House advisor who was fired, but not before creating massive problems for Trump and his repeated attempts to cover up his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the crimes connected to it. We're going to break all of this down and explain why this latest leak guarantees renewed scrutiny, not only of the cover-up happening inside this administration, but also of what took place during Donald Trump's first term. That includes a previously undisclosed secret meeting involving Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell. But before we get into all of that, please take a moment to leave a like on this video, and if you enjoy our content and haven't already, hit the subscribe button. It goes a long way in supporting our work. Now, before we dive into what this former fired Trump advisor just leaked, we need to start with some important context. The latest Epstein developments come to us from Ari Melber, and they help.
Thousands of new pages past the deadline. We've covered the illegal cover-up since most documents have not been met by the deadline. But what we have now are new emails, investigator notes, new witness accounts, as well as material that goes well beyond some of what was in the DOJ's first release. Before we get into any of the context and the wider legal ramifications, let me tell you highlights of what are in these files. New flight records, newly revealed prosecutor notes, documentation of Donald Trump traveling with Epstein to a degree that even the people inside the DOJ at the time, people with knowledge of the case, found to be a, quote, surprise. More jet travel with Epstein than they knew at the time. A subpoena that was sent to Mar-a-Lago during the Maxwell probe. It was seeking records. That itself is not completely incriminating for Mar-a-Lago, but it's new, and you could see why they wanted to hide it. Here's the Washington Post headline on what is now another day of Epstein file dumps. Quote, second batch of Epstein files with many mentions of Trump. Here's a conservative paper, The Examiner, that says some of the new files include Trump's name, which is putting it mildly, or Mediaite, which is read widely in East Coast media circles, the 5 most shocking Trump mentions in the latest batch of Epstein docs. This is shaking up D.C.
Overnight, under pressure, the Department of Justice releasing thousands more Jeffrey Epstein files, the most substantial dump of documents so far.
Tips about President Trump's degree of involvement with Jeffrey Epstein.
Then this email mentioning President Trump from a federal prosecutor.
On a flight that Trump and Epstein were on?
A flight that Trump and Epstein were on.
Would be 2 possible witnesses in a Maxwell case?
In a Maxwell criminal case.
This group includes an awful lot of references to Trump in the paperwork.
Reporters, other people interested, obviously the members of Congress who demanded this by law have been going through this. At MS Now, we had people burning the midnight oil, even though it is, of course, a holiday week, as they went through these files, trying to verify, trying to make sense of it. Again, we're going to go through these new documents that include that subpoena I mentioned. It was in 2021, pretty recent, that it was sent to Mar-a-Lago and was part of the open case against Maxwell. Of course, the investigations of Maxwell have traversed multiple administrations. There's a photo of Trump with her. We don't know the context of that, but there it is. There are emails from a federal prosecutor about Trump flying on the Epstein jet, writing Trump traveled on Epstein's private jet many more times than previously has been reported. That's Jan 2020. And they note Trump was listed as a passenger on 8 flights in the 90s, including 4 flights where Maxwell was also present. They note in a flight in 93, Trump and Epstein were the only 2 listed passengers. On another, there were 3 passengers. The other individual, besides the deceased trafficker Epstein and the current President Trump, was a 20-year-old name redacted. Now, you can see why a politician might not want any of that spilling out. On the other hand, those pieces of evidence, those references, do not in themselves implicate Donald Trump in a crime or wrongdoing. And that's important to note, given all the interest and some of the salacious details here. The files also have a letter that is purported to have been written by Epstein, so it's in these files, to a serial sex abuser, Larry Nassar. I want to tell you tonight, Trump's DOJ says that while the letter was in the files, right, the letters and emails in.
This has been a failed cover-up, after a failed cover-up, after yet another failed cover-up, and so much of it comes down to the sheer incompetence of the people Donald Trump chose to surround himself with. At this point, it's almost comical. Yes, he hired people he believed were loyal and pliable, people who would bend to his will. What he clearly didn't anticipate was that he might actually need them to do their jobs. Take Pam Bondi, for example. Her role was never to function as an independent, fair attorney general committed to upholding the law. She works for Donald Trump. But even within that expectation, Trump seems to have assumed the job would amount to nothing more than Fox News appearances and yelling about Joe Biden, the auto pen, or whatever manufactured outrage of the week came next. Instead, when it came time to actually manage a real crisis, she failed him. And she's far from the only one. That failure is exactly why this latest leak has now gone public. A new Epstein-related leak reveals a previously hidden photo of Donald Trump with Ghislaine Maxwell, a photo discovered on Steve Bannon's cell phone. Bannon, of course, served in Trump's first White House. According to an email included in the leak, someone reviewing materials found on Bannon's iPhone 7 came across an image of Trump and Maxwell together, an image that had been redacted from the Epstein files. Let that sink in. A former Trump advisor had a photo of Donald Trump with Ghislaine Maxwell on his personal phone. And that image was removed from the official Epstein records. So how does that happen? The Department of Justice has repeatedly claimed that redactions were made solely to protect victims. That's the explanation Pam Bondi wants the public to accept. It's what Todd Blanche wants you to believe. They insist the focus is on shielding victims, nothing more. But that explanation raises an obvious question. Why would a photo of Donald Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell be redacted unless there was a victim present in that image? And if there was, whose victim was it? Epstein's? Maxwell's? Trump's? We don't know, because the photo was hidden. And this is why Donald Trump's relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell deserves far more scrutiny. Too often, Maxwell is framed merely as Epstein's assistant, his right-hand woman, someone who was around, but not central. That narrative is false. Ghislaine Maxwell was not a passive bystander. She was a criminal in her own right. She directly abused children. She actively recruited victims. She helped organize, coordinate, and sustain the entire operation. She wasn't pushing papers. She was running logistics for a criminal enterprise. So when Trump dismissively claims that everyone in Palm Beach knew Maxwell or bumped into her, that matters far more than he wants to admit. Being associated with Ghislaine Maxwell didn't just mean attending the same social events. It meant proximity to someone coordinating both the crimes and the cover-up. That suggests Donald Trump's concern isn't limited to what he did alongside Jeffrey Epstein, but what he may have done alongside Ghislaine Maxwell. And that distinction is critical because it points not just to participation, but to planning, coordination, and execution.
Congressman, thank you so much for being with us this morning. It's great to see you. Is this a cover-up?
Well, sure. I mean, if you read the statute, the only things they're allowed to be redacting are related to child sex abuse, physical abuse, ongoing investigations, which they say there are none, and national security. So how can you block out an entire document? It makes no sense. And remember, Trump opposed the legislation up until the very end when he could read the writing on the wall. Then he said, oh, I'm for it. They decided they're just going to try to obstruct the implementation of the legislation. So that's the fight that we're in now.
Do you think the 30-day time frame for release of these documents was realistic?
Well, yeah, given that they came to us back in July and said they'd been through all the documents and they couldn't find any basis for bringing any other lawsuits, they'd already scrutinized them.
What of this do you think falls into the category of protecting victims and what falls into the category of cover-up? Because obviously there is a very strong interest in making sure the victims are protected.
Yeah, I'd say probably 0 and 100. They've not shown any deference or respect for the victims at all, for the survivors of this nightmare. And it's all about covering up things that, for whatever reason, Donald Trump doesn't want to go public, either about himself, other members of his family, friends, Jeffrey Epstein, or just the social, business, cultural network that he was involved in for at least a decade, if not longer.
So do you think this actions that the Department of Justice are taking on this are specifically designed to protect Donald Trump?
Well, what else? I mean, that's their whole business model. In fact, they're trying to reorganize American constitutional jurisprudence and the rule of law around the idea that the entire executive branch serves one guy. That's the unitary executive theory, that this is all about serving whatever Donald Trump wants. So yeah, I can't imagine what other interests they have in mind.
one of the things we did see were a number of pictures of former President Bill Clinton with Jeffrey Epstein, with Ghislaine Maxwell in a jacuzzi, swimming in a pool. How do you explain that connection, and are you comfortable with it?
I mean, I have no idea. This is why we want to get to the bottom of it and get all of the facts out to, to the public. I mean, that's what this is about. And, look, there are clearly lots of people that are in photographs with Jeffrey Epstein. And in addition to being a child sex predator and an international child sex abuse trafficker, he was very much of a socialite and a sycophant and a panderer to different people. So there's lots of people who've appeared in those contexts, and we shouldn't be covering up for anybody if they were actually involved in criminality. And otherwise, it's embarrassing to people, but the Congress has said we don't want the suppression of materials simply because somebody may be embarrassed. I mean, Bill Clinton has appeared along with Donald Trump, along with Noam Chomsky, and other people from different aspects of our society. But what we're looking at is how did a global, decades-long, billion-dollar sex ring go undetected?
We have to ask every question. Nothing can be off limits, because this administration has earned none of our trust and has given us every reason to be skeptical. That's why we're going to keep calling this out, right here on this show. If you want to support that work, make sure to hit the subscribe button and leave a like on this video. And if you made it all the way to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. Keep fighting, everyone.